Nobody was laughing by the time Alara was finished, but they were all laughing when she entered the boardroom. The laughter wasn't loud or overt. It was worse. It was the quiet, shared smirking between men in expensive suits who believed they were in a room where they held all the power. It was the condescending tilt of a head, the dismissive wave of a hand, the subtle eye roll that passed from one end of the polished mahogany table to the other. She felt it more than she heard it, a cold pressure that settled in her chest and made the air feel thin. She was here to present a risk analysis, a series of concerns she had meticulously documented over the past 3 months. Concerns that, in her opinion, put the company's most ambitious project in a generation at critical risk. She clutched her tablet, the cool metal a stark contrast to her clammy palms. At the head of the table sat Mr. Sterling, the department head, a man whose silver hair and tailored suits were a form of corporate armor. To his right was Marcus, her fiancé. Marcus, who had held her that morning and told her he was proud of her. Marcus, who was now refusing to meet her eyes, his focus locked on Sterling as if seeking approval. The rest of the board members were a blur of gray and navy blue, faces she knew but couldn't quite place, their collective skepticism a physical force in the room. She was the youngest person there by a decade and the only woman. She was a junior data analyst and they were the kings of this castle. "All right, Alara, let's get this over with," Sterling said, his voice dripping with forced patience. "We have a launch to plan. What's this critical emergency you felt couldn't be an email?" The use of her first name, while everyone else was a Mr., was deliberate. It was a reminder of her place. She took a shaky breath and began. She presented data points, simulation results, and material stress projections. She spoke of a fundamental flaw in the energy storage medium they were using, a cascading failure point that their own models had missed because they were using outdated parameters. She had found it buried in an old technical specification, a detail so small and seemingly insignificant that it had been overlooked by everyone. Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart was hammering against her ribs. She tried to convey the urgency without sounding hysterical, the facts without letting the fear she felt for the project's future seep into her tone. For 10 minutes, she spoke to a wall of indifference. They checked their watches. They scrolled through messages on their phones. Marcus doodled on a notepad, a perfect portrait of detached boredom. When she finally finished, a heavy silence filled the room, not of consideration, but of annoyance. Sterling leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He looked at Marcus, not at her. "Marcus, is this what you have to deal with at home? All this emotion?" The men around the table chuckled. It was a low, predatory sound. Marcus finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes broke something inside her. It wasn't love or support. It was embarrassment. He was embarrassed by her. "She gets carried away sometimes," Marcus said, his voice attempting a light, dismissive tone that felt like a physical blow. "She's very passionate about the details." "Details?" Sterling scoffed, picking up a pen and tapping it on the table. He turned his cold gaze on her. The smile was gone, replaced by a flat, hard line. "Listen to me very carefully, Alara. We have secured $200 million in funding for this project. Our partners, our investors, and this entire board have signed off on it. The best engineering minds in this company have built it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "And you, a junior analyst who has been here for all of 2 years, think you've found something they all missed?" She opened her mouth to speak, to point to the specific line in the report, to the data that proved her point. But he cut her off with a sharp, slicing motion of his hand. "No. We're done here." He looked around the table, his authority absolute. Then his eyes landed back on her, filled with a dismissive pity that was more insulting than pure anger. He gestured to her tablet, to the meticulous work she had poured her soul into. "Stick to your little notes, Alara. The adults are talking." The phrase hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. "Stick to your little notes." It wasn't just a dismissal of her work. It was a dismissal of her entire being. It categorized her as a child, emotional and irrelevant, while the adults, handled the serious business. The room was silent for a beat, and then the meeting moved on as if she had never spoken, as if she wasn't even there. They started discussing the press launch, the catering, the guest list. She just stood there, frozen, the blood draining from her face. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, but no one saw her. They saw a nuisance that had been swatted away. She didn't remember walking out of the boardroom. The next thing she knew, she was standing in the empty hallway. The muffled sounds of their continued meeting a distant hum. The tablet in her hand felt impossibly heavy. The notes, her little notes, the culmination of weeks of sleepless nights, of a nagging feeling she couldn't shake, of a deep dive into technical archives that no one else had bothered to read. It was all there, the proof, and it meant nothing. She looked down at the screen, at the complex equations and stark warnings, and felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and sharp. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, crystalline rage. And in that moment, a cold, quiet resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach. They thought her notes were a joke. They thought she was emotional. They had no idea what she was capable of. They had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. She took a deep breath, wiped the tear from her face, and her expression hardened. The adults were talking. Fine. But she would have the last word. The drive home was a blur of red taillights and gray pavement. Alara didn't remember any of it. Her mind was a chaotic replay of the boardroom scene, each condescending smirk, each dismissive word echoing until it became a deafening roar. Sterling's phrase, "Stick to your little notes, Alara. The adults are talking," was on a relentless loop. It was the casual cruelty of it, the way it was designed not just to disagree but to diminish, to infantilize her in front of her peers and the man she was supposed to marry. When she walked into the apartment she shared with Marcus, the silence was suffocating. It was a beautiful space, minimalist and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. It was his apartment, really. He had owned it before they met, and her presence felt more like a temporary installation than a permanent fixture. Her books were tucked away on a single shelf. Her favorite worn armchair was relegated to a corner of the bedroom. She had always told herself it was practical, that his taste was better. Now she saw it for what it was. She had made herself smaller to fit into his life. She went straight to the bedroom and pulled a dusty cardboard box from the top of the closet. It was heavy, filled with old binders, loose papers, and spiral-bound notebooks. The box smelled of old paper and dust, the scent of a university library. It was the last tangible piece she had of him. Dr. Alastair Finch, her mentor. Her mind flashed back 7 years. She was a university student, bright but unsure, lost in the sea of a massive engineering program. Dr. Finch was a semi-retired professor, a man the university kept on for his legendary reputation, even though his field of study, foundational energy storage and material science, was considered dated, almost archaic. Most students avoided his classes, opting for trendier subjects like AI and software development. But Alara had been captivated. He didn't teach theories, he taught principles. He saw technology not as a collection of applications but as a language, and he was fluent in its grammar. He had taken her under his wing. She spent more time in his cluttered office than in her own dorm room. He was a quiet, gentle man with eyes that saw the world in a way she was only beginning to understand. He saw the hidden potential in things and in people. He saw it in her. He had been the first person to look at her complex, sprawling mind maps and not see chaos, but elegant structure. "Never let them rush you, Alara," he had told her once, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. They were in his workshop, a converted garage behind his small house, filled with humming machinery and the scent of ozone. He was tinkering with a strange, crystalline lattice suspended in a magnetic field. The world wants quick answers. It wants shiny objects. But the real work, the foundational work, is slow, is patient. It requires you to understand the why before you even think about the how. The memory was so vivid she could almost feel the cool metal of the workbench under her fingertips. She remembered the day he had given her the box. He was sick by then, the illness making him frail, his once strong hands trembling slightly. He had been denied funding for his final project, his life's work deemed commercially unviable by a panel of apathetic corporate sponsors. The rejection had broken something in him. "I'm done," he had said, his voice thin. "They don't see it. But the principles are sound," he had gestured to the box. "This is all of it. My notes, my patents, my failures. It's a mess, but it's all there. I want you to have it." "What am I supposed to do with it?" she had asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Understand it," he had replied, his gaze intense. "Don't just read it. Learn its language. The market isn't ready for this now. It's too expensive, too complex. But one day someone will try to build something similar, and they'll cut corners. They'll take the easy path, and it will fail. When that day comes, you will know why." He had coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "I'm leaving the intellectual property to you, Elara. All of it. The patents are in your name as the inheritor of my estate. My lawyer has the paperwork. It's not worth much now. Maybe it never will be. But it's yours. Protect it. Or, when the time is right, use it." Back in the present, Elara's fingers trembled as she lifted the lid of the box. There it was, right on top. A thick, blue binder labeled Project Chimera. Foundational Principles of Cryo-Resonant Energy Storage, Chimera. That was his name for it. It was the very technology her company, Sterling Dunn, was using for their new flagship product, Helios. Or rather, it was a cheap, bastardized version of it. She pulled out the binder and opened it on the floor. Her heart pounded as she flipped through the pages. His familiar, spidery handwriting was everywhere. Scrawled notes in the margins, complex diagrams, calculations that ran for pages. She remembered him trying to explain it to her, the excitement in his voice as he spoke of stable energy states and resonance frequencies. It was his magnum opus. And then she saw it. Tucked into a plastic sleeve at the back was a thin, official-looking document. A technical bulletin from a materials supplier, dated 12 years ago. It was a warning. A specific batch of the crystalline polymer, the very core of the technology, had a microscopic structural instability. Under sustained high-frequency resonance, the exact kind Sterling Dunn's Helios project was designed to generate, it wouldn't just fail. It would experience a cascade resonance collapse. In layman's terms, it wouldn't just stop working. It would effectively shatter at a molecular level, rendering the entire device a worthless brick. Her risk analysis for the board had been based on simulations. She had predicted a 70% chance of system degradation over 5 years. But this was different. This was a certainty. Dr. Finch had documented it. He had underlined a single sentence in red ink. Use of this batch material in high-resonance applications is contraindicated. Risk of catastrophic, non-recoverable failure is 100%. Her blood ran cold. She scrambled back to the box, digging through files until she found what she was looking for. A copy of one of his patents. Patent US 9-481, 515, B2. It described the method for creating a stable version of the polymer, the correct version, the one that wouldn't shatter. It was a complex, multi-stage process. An expensive process. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. Sterling Dunn hadn't stolen the whole technology. They had stolen the idea, but they had cut corners. They had likely bought a massive, cheap stockpile of the old, flawed polymer from a supplier that had gone out of business years ago. They didn't have the patent for the stable version, so they had tried to build around the problem with software patches and containment fields. They were building a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. The project wasn't just at risk. It was a guaranteed failure. A $200 million bomb waiting to go off. And Marcus was the project lead. He had to know. Or, if he didn't, his willful ignorance was just as damning. He had access to all the technical specifications. He had either not done his due diligence or he had seen the risk and buried it, hoping to cash in and get out before it all came crashing down. The sound of the front door opening made her jump. Marcus was home. "Elara?" he called out, his voice wary. He walked into the bedroom and stopped, his eyes falling on the box and the scattered papers on the floor. "What is all this?" She looked up at him, her face pale. The love she had felt for him just that morning had curdled into something cold and sharp. She saw him clearly now, not as the man she loved, but as one of them. One of the men in the boardroom. Arrogant, dismissive, and willing to sacrifice anything, and anyone, for his own ambition. "It's my notes," she said, her voice quiet but devoid of its earlier tremor. It was flat, hard steel. "My little notes." He had the grace to look ashamed, for a moment. "Look, Ellie, about today." Sterling was out of line. "But you have to understand the pressure we're under. You can't just walk into a room like that and drop a bomb." "So I was supposed to what? Stay quiet?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "Let you parade a ticking time bomb out to the public and our investors?" "It's not a time bomb," he snapped, his guilt quickly morphing into defensive anger. "It's a calculated risk. The simulations are within acceptable parameters." "Your simulations are wrong," she said, tapping the old technical bulletin. "You're using the flawed polymer, aren't you? The batch from Kinetsu Materials, before they went under." The color drained from his face. He stared at the paper in her hand as if it were a ghost. How did you know about that?" "It's all in here," she said, gesturing to the box. "The work of a man you and Sterling dismissed as a washed-up academic. Dr. Finch. He documented everything. He even created the patent for the stable version, the one you don't have." He was speechless. The silence stretched, thick with betrayal. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. "How could you, Marcus?" she whispered, the anger giving way to a wave of profound, gut-wrenching grief. "How could you let them talk to me like that? How could you sit there and say nothing?" "I'm building a career, Alara," he finally exploded, his voice raw with desperation. "This project is my shot. Everything is riding on this. Do you have any idea what it's like? The expectations? Sterling is my boss. I can't just contradict him in front of the entire board. Even if he's wrong? Even if he's about to sink the entire company? We would have fixed it in version 2, he argued, his voice pleading now. After the launch, after the stock price soared, we would have had the capital to do it right." She stared at him, the last vestiges of her affection crumbling to dust. He was admitting it. He knew it was flawed and was willing to commit fraud on a massive scale. He had looked her in the eye and lied, not just about the project, but about everything. Their life together, his respect for her, his love. It was all a convenient fiction to support his ambition. "Get out," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. "What? Ellie, don't be like this. Don't be so emotional." That word again. Emotional. It was like a switch flipped in her brain. The grief vanished, replaced by an arctic calm. She stood up, her movements precise and deliberate. "I am not being emotional, Marcus. I am being precise. This apartment is in your name. My things are packed in 2 suitcases and a few boxes. I will have a courier pick them up tomorrow. I want you to leave. Now." He stared at her, utterly stunned. He had expected tears, pleading, a fight he could win by wearing her down. He had not expected this cold, unbreakable finality. "Alara, you're not serious." "I have never been more serious in my life," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "You and Sterling wanted the adults to talk. Well, the conversation is over. Get out of my sight." He stood there for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing, searching for the right words to manipulate her, to bring back the compliant, agreeable woman he thought he knew. But she was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone with a spine of steel he had never suspected was there. Defeated, he turned and walked out of the room. A minute later, she heard the front door slam shut. Alara didn't cry. She sank to the floor, surrounded by the legacy of the one man who had truly believed in her. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Chloe? It's Alara," she said when her friend answered. "I need help. I need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I need a shark." The first few days were a fog of logistics and heartache. Alara moved into a small, sterile, extended-stay hotel room. It was beige and anonymous, a place with no memories and no attachments, which was exactly what she needed. The courier had picked up her things from Marcus's apartment without incident. There was no call from him, no text, just a cold, clean break. The silence from him was both a relief and a confirmation of his cowardice. He had moved on the second she was no longer a convenient asset. Her best friend, Chloe, was a whirlwind of pragmatic support. Chloe was a freelance journalist who specialized in corporate malfeasance, and her network of contacts was a thing of legend. She was sharp, cynical, and fiercely loyal. The moment Alara had called her, Chloe had switched into crisis mode. "Okay, first things first," Chloe had said, pacing the tiny hotel room while Alara sat numbly on the edge of the bed. "He's a snake. Sterling is a dinosaur. The company is a house of cards. We knew all this. What we didn't know was that you were holding the one pin that could knock it all down." "It's not a pin, Chloe," Alara had mumbled, staring at the worn carpet. "It's a library, a whole legacy of research they ignored." "Even better," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "Legacies have legal weight." True to her word, Chloe had found her a lawyer. His name was Benjamin Carter. He wasn't a shark. He was a great white that had eaten all the other sharks. He worked out of a sleek, minimalist office that screamed quiet, expensive power. He was in his late 50s, with a calm, unnerving stillness and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the core of any issue. Alara sat across from him, the blue binder from Dr. Finch's box open on the table between them. She had spent 2 sleepless nights organizing everything, creating a clear timeline, cross-referencing company reports with Finch's patents and the damning technical bulletin. She laid out the story, her voice low and steady, stripped of the emotion that had choked her in the boardroom. She just presented the facts. Carter listened without interruption, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. He read through the patent, his eyes scanning the technical language with an ease that surprised her. He examined the copy of the old bulletin. When she was finished, he was silent for a long, contemplative minute. "Dr. Alastair Finch," Carter said, his voice a soft baritone. "I remember that name. He tried to sue a consortium of tech companies about 15 years ago. Pro bono. He lost. The courts said his work was too theoretical." "They were wrong," Alara said. "Yes," Carter agreed, a flicker of something, respect perhaps, in his eyes. "They were. And now, Sterling Dunn has built a $200 million product based on the very theory they dismissed, while simultaneously violating the core patent that makes it viable." He leaned back. "This is not just an infringement case, Ms. Vance. This is potentially corporate fraud on a monumental scale. They are knowingly using a flawed material and misrepresenting the product's stability to their investors and the public. Marcus, my ex-fiancé, he's the project lead. He admitted they knew it was flawed," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Did he admit this in writing?" "No. Just to me." "Then it's hearsay," Carter said, his tone matter-of-fact. "His admission is useful for your own resolve, but not in a courtroom. We need more. We need irrefutable proof that the leadership knew. We need to find the paper trail." And so the investigation began. Alara took a leave of absence from work, citing personal reasons. It was approved instantly, a sign of how eager they were to have her out of the way. She spent her days in a small, windowless conference room that Carter had provided, which she and Chloe had nicknamed the War Room. The walls were soon covered in whiteboards, filled with diagrams, timelines, and names. Chloe, using her investigative skills, started digging into Sterling Dunn's financials. She pulled public filings, investor reports, and articles from obscure trade publications. "They're leveraged to the hilt," Chloe announced one afternoon, tapping a spreadsheet on her laptop. "They took out a massive bridge loan to cover the final R&D phase. If the Helios launch fails or is even significantly delayed, they default. They don't just lose money, they lose the company. The bank could call in the debt and seize their assets." Meanwhile, Alara's job was to dive deeper into Dr. Finch's archives. She had to become the world's leading expert on his work. She read every page, every note, every failed experiment. She wasn't just a data analyst anymore. She was an archaeologist, unearthing a lost history of science. She began to understand the why behind his principles. He wasn't just building a device. He was trying to create a perfect, harmonious system. Sterling Dunn had taken his symphony and turned it into noise. Carter, for his part, began making quiet, strategic moves. He hired a private investigator, a discreet former federal agent named Morrison, to look into the supply chain. Morrison's job was to find proof that Sterling Dunn had purchased the specific, flawed batch of polymer from the defunct Kinetsu Materials. Weeks turned into a month. The work was grueling and isolating. Alara barely slept. She lived on coffee and the cold fire of her anger. There were moments of doubt, late at night in her silent hotel room, where the sheer scale of what she was attempting seemed impossible. She was one person against a corporate giant. But then she would remember the look on Marcus's face, the dismissive laughter in that boardroom, and the memory of Dr. Finch's tired, hopeful eyes. This wasn't just for her anymore. It was for him. The breakthrough came from Morrison. He had tracked down a former shipping manager for Kinetsu Materials, now living in retirement in Arizona. After some persuasion, and a consulting fee paid by Carter's firm, the man had dug through his personal records. He found it, a bill of lading, a shipping manifest for 10 tons of K-Polymer Batch 7B. The faulty batch sold for pennies on the dollar to a shell corporation. A shell corporation that Morrison, with Chloe's help, traced back to a holding company owned by Sterling Dunn. The manifest was dated 3 years ago. It was the smoking gun. They had knowingly bought the defective material from the very beginning. Alara held the scanned copy of the manifest in her hands, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the proof Carter needed. It wasn't just negligence. It was premeditated. They knew, she whispered, looking at Carter across the war room table. All this time they knew. Yes, Carter said, his expression grim. And now we know. He looked at the manifest, then at the patent, then at Chloe's financial analysis spread across the table. A slow, dangerous smile formed on his face. They think they are planning a product launch. They have no idea that they are, in fact, planning their own execution. But Carter wasn't satisfied with just a lawsuit. A lawsuit would take years. It would be messy. The company could declare bankruptcy, burying them in legal motions until Alara's funds ran out. We don't want to fight them in a trench, Carter explained, pacing the war room. We want to trigger a collapse. An event so sudden and so public that they have no time to react. We don't just want to win. We want to annihilate them. His plan was audacious. It moved beyond simple legal recourse and into the realm of corporate warfare. He explained that Dr. Finch's patents, especially the one for the stable polymer, were the key. They weren't just a defensive weapon to sue for infringement. They were an offensive asset. This intellectual property, Carter said, tapping the patent document, is the missing piece to a multi-billion-dollar puzzle. Sterling Dunn tried to solve the puzzle without it and failed. But other companies, bigger companies, know its value. They have the resources to implement it correctly. The strategy began to form. They wouldn't just sue Sterling Dunn. They would sell the solution to their biggest competitor. They would hand-deliver the key to the kingdom to an enemy at the gates, along with a map showing exactly where Sterling Dunn's defenses would crumble. Carter's team began compiling a portfolio. It wasn't a legal brief. It was an investment prospectus. It contained Dr. Finch's patents, Alara's analysis of the Helios project's fatal flaw, the bill of lading proving the use of defective materials, and a projection of the market value if the technology were to be implemented correctly. Who do we take it to? Chloe asked, her journalist's mind racing with the possibilities. There's only one real choice, Carter said, pulling up a company profile on the main screen. Helios Corporation. Alara stared at the screen. It was an almost comical irony. Sterling Dunn had named their doomed project Helios. And Helios Corp was a titan of the tech industry, a global conglomerate with a reputation for aggressive expansion and ruthless efficiency. They were Sterling Dunn's most feared rival. Taking this to them wouldn't just be lighting a match. It would be pouring gasoline on a fire and handing the matchbox to an arsonist. They'll bury them, Elara said, a hint of awe in her voice. That's the idea, Carter replied. But they won't do it just for fun. We need to make it an irresistible business proposition. The next 2 weeks were a blur of frenetic activity. Under Carter's guidance, Elara prepared to be the primary presenter of this proposition. She had to translate Dr. Finch's dense, academic work and her own complex data analysis into a clear, concise, and compelling business case. She rehearsed for hours with Carter and his partners playing the role of the skeptical Helios Corp executives, peppering her with questions, challenging her assumptions. You are no longer a junior analyst asking for permission, Carter told her during one grueling session. You are the sole proprietor of a revolutionary piece of intellectual property. You are not coming to them as a supplicant. You are coming to them as a kingmaker. You hold the key to an entire market. Act like it. The words resonated deep within her. The timid, anxious woman who had fumbled with her tablet in Sterling Dunn's boardroom was gone. In her place was someone else, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal and sleepless nights of research. She knew the material better than anyone alive. It was part of her now. Dr. Finch's legacy lived in her. While she prepared, Marcus re-entered her life, not with an apology, but with a final, breathtaking act of arrogance. He sent her an invitation, an engraved, cream-colored card. It was an invitation to the official Helios Project press launch and gala. There was a handwritten note at the bottom in his familiar, sloping script. Ellie, it read, I know things are complicated, but this is the biggest night of my career. It would mean the world to me if you were there to see it. We're on the verge of something incredible. Maybe after you see what we've accomplished, you'll understand. She stared at the invitation, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. He didn't get it. He truly, fundamentally did not get it. He still saw her as the emotional girlfriend who had overreacted. He thought that a display of his success, of the very project built on lies and disrespect, would win her back. He was so confident, so wrapped in his own delusion, that he was personally inviting her to witness his own immolation. Chloe peered over her shoulder at the card. Wow, the audacity. It's almost impressive. He's not just audacious, Elara said, a cold smile touching her lips. He's useful. He's just handed us the perfect venue for the final act. She looked at Carter. The press launch is in 10 days. Can we be ready? Carter looked at the invitation, then back at her. The plan had been to approach Helios Corp quietly, to let the acquisition happen behind the scenes. But this was an opportunity for something far more dramatic, far more satisfying. Oh, we'll be ready, he said, his voice low and dangerous. They want to throw a party to celebrate their success? Fine. Let's give them a fireworks display they will never forget. The false calm was the hardest part. In the days leading up to the launch, Elara had to exist in a state of suspended animation. She had to act as if nothing was happening, as if her world wasn't about to be irrevocably altered by a plan she herself had set in motion. The meeting with Helios Corp was scheduled for the day before the launch. It was the point of no return. She spent those days in meticulous preparation. She wasn't just memorizing data points. She was internalizing a new identity. When she looked in the mirror, she practiced holding her head high, her expression calm and unreadable. She bought a new suit, a dark charcoal gray, impeccably tailored. It was armor, just like Sterling's, but hers was forged from knowledge, not arrogance. Marcus tried to call twice. She let both calls go to voicemail. His messages were a mix of pleading and condescension. Ellie, please just come to the launch. Don't let your emotions ruin this for us, one of them said. The us was particularly galling. There was no us anymore. There was only him, standing on a platform he didn't realize was rigged to collapse. The final provocation came not from Marcus, but from the company itself. A memo was circulated, announcing a round of departmental restructuring to take place after the successful launch of the Helios project. It was corporate speak for layoffs. And attached to the list of redundant departments was a list of specific roles being eliminated. Her role, junior data analyst, was on that list. They were firing her. They were so certain of their triumph that they were already cleaning house, and she was the first piece of dust they intended to sweep out the door. They were going to humiliate her in the boardroom, have her ex-fiancé publicly flaunt his success in her face, and then fire her. The sheer, layered cruelty of it solidified any lingering shred of doubt she might have had. This was no longer just about justice for Dr. Finch or salvaging a piece of technology. This was personal. The day of the Helios Corp meeting arrived. Alara walked into their headquarters, a towering skyscraper of black glass and steel, with Benjamin Carter at her side. They were escorted to the top floor, to a conference room with a panoramic view of the city. The air up here was different, rarefied. The board of Helios Corp was formidable. At the head of the table sat their CEO, a woman named Anya Sharma, known for her sharp intellect and take-no-prisoners approach to business. She regarded Alara with cool, appraising eyes. Alara didn't flinch. She took her place at the table, opened her laptop, and began. She didn't start with the patent or the infringement. She started with the science. She walked them through Dr. Finch's foundational principles, her voice clear and confident. She used the language he had taught her, the grammar of the technology. For the first time, she was speaking to people who were fluent in the same language. They understood. She could see it in their eyes, in the way they leaned forward, their skepticism melting away into rapt attention. Then, she moved to Sterling Dunn. She laid out their fatal flaw, presenting the technical bulletin and her analysis of the cascade resonance collapse. She showed them the bill of lading, the irrefutable proof of their fraud. They are launching a product tomorrow that is guaranteed to fail, she stated, her voice even. When it fails, their stock will be worthless, and their primary lender will likely call in their debt, triggering an insolvency event. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. Then, she delivered the final piece of the puzzle. They did this because they do not own the patent for the stable polymer. Patent US 9, 481, 515, B2". She put the patent document on the screen. Ido. Or rather, the estate of Dr. Alastair Finch does, and I am his sole heir and executor. This patent is the key to making this technology work. It is the key to a market projected to be worth $50 billion over the next decade. Anya Sharma leaned forward, her expression intense. What are you proposing, Ms. Vance? I am proposing a partnership, Alara said, her gaze unwavering. My lawyer has a prospectus. We are offering to sell the entire Finch IP portfolio, the patents, the research, all of it, exclusively to Helios Corporation. With this IP, you will not only be able to launch a successful version of this technology, but you will also have grounds to file an immediate injunction against Sterling Dunn for patent infringement. Carter slid a sleek, bound document across the table to Sharma. Furthermore, he added smoothly, given their precarious financial situation, we believe a hostile takeover bid, initiated concurrently with the injunction, would be highly effective. You wouldn't just be buying a patent. You would be acquiring an entire company, its infrastructure, and its market share for pennies on the dollar, while simultaneously eliminating your primary competitor. The room was silent. The Helios Corp board members looked at each other, then at Sharma. The air crackled with energy. Alara had just handed them a loaded gun, pointed it at their rival's head, and offered to sell them the bullets. Anya Sharma picked up the prospectus. She flipped through it for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she closed it and looked directly at Alara. This is the most ruthless, elegant, and well-documented corporate takedown I have ever seen, Ms. Vance, she said. A slow smile spread across her face. We're in. Draw up the papers. We'll have them signed by morning. She then looked at her legal team. I want the injunction filed the moment the sale is complete. And I want the takeover bid announced tomorrow. Publicly, her eyes twinkled with predatory glee. Let's give them a launch party they'll never forget. The next evening, Alara walked into the grand ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel. The Sterling Dunn launch gala was in full swing. The room was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns, the air thick with the scent of champagne and self-congratulation. A string quartet played in the corner. It was a monument to corporate arrogance. She had RSVP'd. She wore a simple, elegant black dress. No jewelry except for a pair of small, understated earrings. Her power was not on display. It was hidden, coiled, and ready to strike. She saw him almost immediately. Marcus was holding court near the stage, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing with a group of investors. He looked triumphant. He hadn't seen her yet. To his left stood Mr. Sterling, looking regal and smug, accepting congratulations like a king receiving his subjects. Alara felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie whose ending she had already written. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. She found a quiet spot near the back of the room, took a glass of water from a passing waiter, and waited. At 8 p.m. sharp, the lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. Mr. Sterling took the stage, his face beaming under the spotlight. "Friends, colleagues, partners," he began, his voice booming through the sound system. "Welcome. Tonight, we are not just launching a product. We are launching the future of energy, the future of technology, the future of Sterling Dunn." There was a round of enthusiastic applause. Alara just watched, her expression unreadable. Sterling continued his speech, painting a glowing picture of the Helios project's potential. He spoke of innovation, of vision, of market domination. Then he brought Marcus to the stage. And none of this would be possible without the tireless leadership of this brilliant young man. Our project lead, Marcus Thorne. Marcus stepped into the spotlight, his smile wide and blindingly confident. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning, and for a moment, they met Alara's. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a look that said, "See, I told you so." It was the last act of condescension he would ever direct at her. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Marcus began. "The Helios is more than just a product. It's a promise of a new era of efficiency and power. And I am thrilled to announce that as of tomorrow morning, it will be available to the world." The crowd erupted. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. As the applause swelled, Sterling and Marcus shook hands, raising their clasped fists in a gesture of shared victory. And then it happened. A man in a dark suit walked calmly to the side of the stage and handed a single piece of paper to Mr. Sterling. At the same time, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the Helios logo, flickered and changed. The face of Anya Sharma, CEO of Helios Corp, filled the screens. She was not smiling. She was sitting at her boardroom table, looking directly into the camera. The room fell silent, a confused murmur rippling through the crowd. Sterling stared at the paper in his hand, his face turning ashen. "Good evening," Anya Sharma's voice echoed through the ballroom, crisp and cold. "My apologies for the interruption. I have an announcement for the board and investors of Sterling Dunn." She held up a document. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Helios Corp acquired the complete intellectual property portfolio of the late Dr. Alastair Finch. This portfolio includes the foundational patents for cryo-resonant energy storage technology. A gasp went through the room. Sterling looked as if he had been punched in the stomach. Marcus's smile had frozen on his face, a grotesque mask of confusion. Consequently, Sharma continued, her voice like ice. "We have just filed a federal injunction against Sterling Dunn for willful and egregious patent infringement in the development of their Helios project. All sales, distribution, and marketing must cease immediately." The silence in the room was no longer confused. It was absolute. It was the sound of $200 million evaporating into thin air. It was the sound of careers ending. Alara watched their faces, the investors, the board members, their expressions shifting from celebration to horror. But Sharma wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she said, her voice dropping, "given the evidence of deliberate material fraud and the resulting financial instability of the company, Helios Corp has, as of 1 hour ago, initiated a hostile takeover bid for all outstanding shares of Sterling Dunn. The offer will be presented to the board tomorrow morning. I expect your prompt cooperation. The video feed cut out, replaced by the Sterling Dunn logo, which now looked like a tombstone. The silence held for a beat, heavy and suffocating. Then chaos erupted. People were shouting, scrambling for their phones. Investors were grabbing at their legal advisors. The string quartet had stopped playing. In the midst of the pandemonium, Sterling, his face purple with rage, stumbled down from the stage. He saw Elara standing there, calm and still amidst the storm. His eyes, wild with disbelief and fury, locked onto hers. "You," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You did this, you little backstabbing snake." He lunged toward her, but his path was blocked by Benjamin Carter, who seemed to appear out of nowhere. At the same time, two uniformed officers, who had entered discreetly at the back of the room, began making their way toward the stage. Elara didn't even look at Sterling. Her eyes were on Marcus. He was still on the stage, paralyzed, his face a mask of utter ruin. He looked at her, his expression pleading, uncomprehending. He still didn't understand. He thought she was emotional. He thought she was weak. He had never truly seen her at all. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. Then she looked at the sputtering, apoplectic Mr. Sterling, who was now being restrained by hotel security. She met his gaze, and her voice, though quiet, cut through the noise like a shard of glass. "I was just sticking to my notes, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion except a chilling finality. "The ones that matter." She then turned, set her glass down on a table, and walked out of the ballroom without a backward glance, leaving the smoldering ruins of their careers behind her. The adults had been talking, but she had just ended the conversation. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The news of the injunction and the hostile takeover hit the financial wires that night. By the time the market opened the next morning, Sterling Dunn stock had entered a freefall from which it would never recover. The company, once a proud institution, was now a wounded animal, bleeding out in public. Elara watched it all unfold from the quiet sanctuary of Carter's office. She felt no elation, no surge of vengeful glee. Instead, there was a profound and quiet sense of rightness, of a balance being restored. It was the feeling of a complex equation finally being solved. The Sterling Dunn board, facing shareholder lawsuits and complete financial collapse, had no choice. They accepted Helios Corp's takeover bid within 48 hours. It was less a negotiation and more an unconditional surrender. The consequences for the men who had wronged her were devastating. Mr. Sterling was fired immediately for gross negligence and potential fraud. His golden parachute was voided. He was last seen leaving the headquarters with a single box of his belongings, his face a gray mask of defeat. The public humiliation was total. His name, once a symbol of corporate power, was now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the country. Marcus's fate was, in many ways, worse. He was also fired, but Helios Corp's legal team wasn't finished with him. As the project lead who had signed off on the technical specifications and budget, he was at the center of the fraud investigation. He was buried under a mountain of legal fees he could not afford. His career was not just over, it was radioactive. No respectable firm would ever hire him again. The man who had been so desperate to build a legacy had succeeded only in building his own prison. Elara, on the other hand, was stepping into a new world of power and respect. Anya Sharma had called her the day after the takeover was finalized. "Ms. Vance," Sharma's voice was crisp and businesslike over the phone, "Helios Corp now owns a $200 million pile of junk and a revolutionary patent we don't fully understand. You are the only person on this planet who understands both. I'm not asking you to come work for us. I'm telling you that we need you." The offer was staggering. They weren't offering her a job. They were offering her a division. She was made vice president of special projects, with a mandate to build a new department from the ground up. Her first task, to salvage the technology from the wreckage of the Helios project and rebuild it correctly, using Dr. Finch's patents as the foundation. She was given a virtually unlimited budget and the full backing of Helios Corp's immense resources. She accepted. Her first act as vice president was to fly to Arizona to meet the retired shipping manager from Kanetsu Materials. She hand-delivered a check to him, a consulting bonus that was more than his entire yearly pension. Dr. Finch believed in rewarding honest work, she told the stunned man. It was a small gesture, but it felt important. It was about principle. Her second act was to go through the personnel files of Sterling Dunn. She rehired a dozen of the most talented junior engineers and technicians, people who had been sidelined and ignored by the old guard, people whose warnings had been dismissed just as hers had been. She built her new team not on resumes, but on integrity. In a box of files that came from Carter's office, she found one last thing from Dr. Finch. It was a sealed envelope with her name on it, tucked into the back of his primary research binder. She had missed it in her frantic search for evidence. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a letter written in his familiar, spidery script. "My dearest Alara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means one of two things. Either I have passed on and you are simply going through my affairs, or, as I hope, the world has finally caught up to my work, and you are at the center of it. I suspect it is the latter. I always knew you had a fire in you, a brilliant mind paired with a quiet strength that most people are too foolish to see. Remember what I taught you. The principles are everything. The world is full of men who will try to take shortcuts, who will praise volume over substance, who will try to convince you that your quiet knowledge is less valuable than their loud confidence. They are wrong. Your greatest strength is not your voice, but what you choose to do with your silence. Your power lies not in shouting, but in knowing. Never, ever let them make you doubt what you know. The patents are yours. The work is yours. They were my legacy, but now they are your tools. Use them to build something better. Not just a better machine, but a better way of doing things. Value the quiet ones. Listen to the details. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you are too emotional to lead. Your passion is not a weakness. It is the engine of your clarity. Be well, be strong, and build a future they could never have envisioned. Tears streamed down Alara's face as she read the letter. They were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of gratitude and release. He had seen her. All along, he had seen her. As part of her severance from Sterling Dunn, negotiated by Carter with a predatory grin, she was given her old desk and its contents. The only thing she took was the small, framed photo of her and Marcus from a happier time. She looked at it for a long moment at the smiling strangers in the picture, then dropped it into a wastebasket without a second thought. She was not the woman in that photo anymore. Her new office at Helios Corp was on the 48th floor, with a corner view that stretched to the horizon. It was large and empty, a blank canvas. She didn't fill it with expensive art or furniture. She brought in a large whiteboard, a comfortable chair, and the dusty cardboard box filled with Dr. Finch's life's work. It was all she needed. She was ready to build. 1 year later, the world looked very different. Alara stood by the panoramic window of her office, a mug of coffee warming her hands, and looked out at the sprawling city below. The department she had built from scratch was now one of the most profitable and innovative divisions within Helios Corporation. Project Chimera, reborn under its original name, was a resounding success. She had overseen its reconstruction personally, ensuring every component was built according to Dr. Finch's exacting principles. There were no shortcuts. The product they launched was not just stable, it was revolutionary. It set a new industry standard and firmly established Helios Corp as the undisputed market leader. Her division was already working on the next generation, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. Her leadership style was the antithesis of everything she had experienced at Sterling Dunn. Her office door was always open. She held weekly deep dive sessions where the youngest interns were encouraged to challenge the assumptions of the senior engineers. She listened. She valued details. She had created a culture of psychological safety where intellectual honesty was the highest virtue. Her team wasn't just loyal, They were inspired. They were doing the best work of their lives. She had also established the Dr. Alistair Finch Foundation for Foundational Research, funded by a percentage of Chimera's profits. It provided grants to academics and researchers whose work was deemed too theoretical or commercially unviable by traditional funding bodies. It was her way of ensuring that other brilliant minds would not be silenced the way her mentor had been. The ghosts of her past had long since faded. Mr. Sterling had been forced into a humiliating early retirement, his reputation in tatters. He had lost his fortune in the collapse and now lived in a small condominium, a bitter and forgotten man. Marcus's fate was a sadder, more pathetic story. Chloe, in her journalistic curiosity, had tracked him down. He was working a low-level sales job for a small electronics supplier, selling discount cables and power adapters over the phone. He was deep in debt and had lost his expensive apartment and his circle of influential friends. Alara had felt a brief, fleeting pang of something. Not pity, but a kind of sorrow for the man he could have been if his ambition hadn't been poisoned by insecurity. He had wanted to be an adult in the room so badly that he had become a permanent child, forever paying for a mistake born of arrogance. One afternoon, months ago, she had seen him. She was leaving a lunch meeting in a different part of the city when she spotted him on the street, arguing with a parking enforcement officer over a ticket on his beat-up sedan. He looked tired and haggard, the expensive suit replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting one. He didn't see her. She had simply paused for a moment, a silent observer of this postscript to her old life, and then walked away. He was no longer her problem. He was barely even a memory. Her own life had blossomed in ways she had never expected. She had found a new, quiet happiness. It wasn't the loud, performative happiness she had tried to have with Marcus. It was a deep, steady sense of peace and fulfillment. Much of that was due to Liam. He was a senior engineer at Helios Corp, a quiet, brilliant man who had been assigned to her team in the early days of Project Chimera. He had been one of the few who had instantly understood the elegance of Dr. Finch's work. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on a foundation of shared intellectual curiosity and mutual respect. He never condescended to her. He challenged her ideas, and he respected when she challenged his. Their conversations were a lively dance of complex thoughts and shared laughter. He wasn't intimidated by her power or her intelligence. He was captivated by it. He loved her for her mind as much as for her heart. "What are you thinking about so hard?" Liam's voice pulled her from her reverie. He had come into her office, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one on her desk and leaned against the window beside her, his presence a warm and comforting solidity. "Just everything," she said, a small smile on her face. "I was thinking about how a year ago, I was standing in a boardroom being told I was too emotional to have a valid opinion." Liam put his arm around her, his touch gentle. "Well, their opinion wasn't very valuable, was it?" he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. "They mistook passion for instability. It's a common mistake among people who have none." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace that was once completely foreign to her. The life she was living now was not a revenge fantasy. It was simply the life she had earned. It was the life she deserved. She had fought for her value, trusted her knowledge, and refused to be diminished. That evening, they attended the first annual gala for the Finch Foundation. Alara stood on the stage, looking out at a room filled with bright, eager young scientists, the first recipients of the Foundation's grants. She spoke about Dr. Finch, about his belief in patient foundational work. She spoke about the importance of listening to the quiet voices and the overlooked details. As she finished her speech, the room rose to its feet in a standing ovation. It was not the polite, obligatory applause of a corporate gala. It was warm, genuine, and full of hope. She looked over and saw Liam in the front row, his face beaming with a pride that was pure and uncomplicated. Later, as they were leaving, one of the young grant recipients, a woman barely out of university, rushed up to her. "Ms. Vance," the young woman said, her eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you. What you said tonight. about not letting people dismiss your passion. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Alara smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Then you need to make me a promise, she said. Never doubt what you know, especially when you're the only one in the room who knows it. The young woman nodded, her expression full of determination. As she walked away, Alara felt a profound sense of completion. She hadn't just built a successful product or a profitable division. She had built a legacy just as Dr. Finch had asked. She was passing on the torch. Looking out at the city lights from the car, nestled beside Liam, she finally understood the true nature of her victory. The real win wasn't the public humiliation of Sterling and Marcus. It wasn't the money or the title. The real victory was the quiet, unshakable confidence she now felt in her own skin. It was the freedom to be exactly who she was without apology. The world hadn't changed, but she had. And in doing so, she had changed her world completely. The adults were no longer talking. She was, and now, finally, everyone was listening. She was living the life she had truly deserved all along.